Hi, and welcome to this introduction to Kotelnikov, the new mastering compressor from Tokyo Dawn Labs, and also its bigger brother, Kotelnikov Gentleman's Edition. Named in honor of Vladimir Kotelnikov, a pioneer of digital sampling techniques, Kotelnikov is proudly digital and makes no attempt to model classic analog design. Instead, complex and intelligent algorithms are used to provide maximum control over dynamics, with minimum added color or negative side effects. Kotelnikov is generously provided as a free download, but for a modest license fee you can purchase the Gentleman's Edition with powerful extra features such as frequency-dependent ratio and workflow enhancements such as automatic gain trim or equal loudness bypass. Let's start with the free version and turn the threshold knob up to reduce the threshold and start squashing the mix. The ratio control over to the right will be familiar to most engineers, controlling the amount of gain reduction applied when the signal exceeds the threshold. Notice that the gain reduction meter automatically changes scale as your gain reduction increases, though you can also change the scale manually with the plus or minus symbols that appear at the bottom or the top of the meter when you hover your mouse over it. The meter can also be switched to show overall gain by clicking at the top, which can make it easier to judge how much makeup gain to add from the right-hand section. The soft knee control is probably also a familiar concept to engineers. With a soft knee, the ratio increases gradually around the threshold, so we have a gentler onset of compression instead of a sudden hard transition. Softer knees usually make for more transparent compression, especially with higher ratios. However, even when applying lots of gain reduction with the hardest knee setting, the compression is still remarkably transparent. Let's toggle the click-free bypass button at the bottom right, and notice how the sound becomes denser and thicker, without sounding squashed or losing its original character. There are various reasons for the transparency of the sound. Kotelnikov uses 64-bit floating-point internal precision, of course, with extreme oversampling for the sidechain to minimize aliasing. The audio signal path also makes use of oversampling. But importantly, only the delta signal is oversampled. The delta is the difference between input and output, which we can listen to by pressing the delta button to the right. Oversampling only the delta path means Kotelnikov can be completely bit transparent when no gain reduction is applied. Oversampling levels can be changed via the process quality drop-down at the top of the interface. Eco mode provides very low levels of aliasing with a very modest CPU hit, while precise mode reduces distortion to inaudible levels below -140 dB, with only a slightly increased CPU load. Users of the Gentleman's Edition can also choose the insane processing mode, which provides an internal bandwidth of around 400 kHz and essentially removes aliasing entirely. A more fundamental reason for the transparency of the sound, however, is the unique dual peak and RMS detection paths. These run in parallel, each with their own separate release setting, and the balance between them is controlled via the peak crest knob above. Let's start by turning this all the way to the left. We're now only using the peak detection path, so the RMS release knob is greyed out to indicate it no longer has any effect. And we now have true peak compression, which responds to the intersample peaks of the analog waveform, rather than just individual sample values. The peak compression is capable of extremely fast attack times with remarkably little distortion, while slower attack times can enhance snappy transients or add a powerful punch. While avoiding the strong colour that such settings often introduce in other compressor designs. Likewise, the release can go very fast without the distortion that would usually be the result. The release time is highly program dependent, becoming much faster in response to short transients to avoid overcompression effects. Peak compression on its own can be extremely useful for tracking or mixing duties, where maximum control is required with minimum distortion. Okay, now let's turn the peak crest knob to the other extreme, so we're only using the RMS detection part. And the compressor now responds only to average signal levels. This corresponds much closer to the way human beings perceive volume. So the RMS compressor will follow the overall loudness envelope without responding instantly to every peak and transient. Actually, this isn't a standard RMS algorithm with a single fixed window size. Kotelnikov uses a more sophisticated approach that ensures an optimal window size for all frequencies. So there is no need for an RMS window control. And the release time can also be much faster and more aggressive as a result. The RMS release is again highly program dependent, but this time in the other direction. The release will automatically lengthen when required to prevent pumping effects, especially during sudden pauses. RMS compression can be used on its own to gently even out dynamic changes in a vocal part, for example, and help to keep it pinned to the front of the mix. With the peak crest knob set anywhere other than the two extremes, both peak and RMS detection paths are active, with gain reduction following whichever is greater, as we can see from the LED indicators next to each release knob. And we can use the peak crest control to set the balance between the two types of compression. In mastering circles, the difference between peak and average levels, or peak to average ratio, is called the crest factor, and it provides a measure of how dynamic the program material is. Material with little or no transient content, like a heavily distorted guitar part, for example, will have a much lower crest factor than, say, an uncompressed recording of a drum kit. Likewise, a mix that has been flattened with a brick wall limiter will have a lower crest factor than the original unlimited version of the mix. Apart from its predecessor, the feedback compressor, Kotelnikov is unique in allowing the crest factor to be manipulated directly using the peak crest knob. Let's try processing a drum kit to demonstrate, with a fast attack time for firm control of the peaks. And notice the difference the peak crest knob makes. Turning it up increases the threshold for just the peak compressor, so we get a dynamic, open-sounding kit with lots of space. Set high enough, the peak compressor stops working entirely. If I turn it down, however, the peak compression starts to work harder, pushing the transients down into the body of the drums for a denser, more powerful sound. This is very dependent on the audio you process, however. With less dynamic material, the peak crest knob will need to be set lower before peak compression starts to take effect. However, you can also influence their relationship with the release controls. If I set a long, slow peak release, plus a fast RMS release, the release stage will be dominated by the peaks section, creating a more aggressive sound. But reversing these settings sounds dramatically different, with the peak compression giving way to the gentler RMS stage almost immediately after each drum hit. When processing a full mix, you can therefore tune the RMS release to control the overall dynamic shape of the music and the gluing effects of the compression. And use the peak release to control the after effects of transients like drum hits. Okay, let's take a look at the low frequency relax section over to the left. This section allows you to configure a high pass filter for the sidechain, which makes the compressor respond less to low frequencies such as kick or bass. We are in effect increasing the compressor threshold for those low frequencies. Filter frequency can be set as high as 500 Hz. and we can choose from a range of filter slopes, or flat to disable the filter completely. Users of the Gentleman's Edition benefit from a slightly more sophisticated high-pass filter, with a continuously variable slope. However, they also gain the unique FDR feature below, which can provide a different solution to the same problem. FDR stands for Frequency Dependent Ratio. Let's turn it on and press the Edit button to show a graph with frequency on the x-axis and ratio on the y-axis. And we see a horizontal line indicating my current ratio setting of 2:1 applies equally to all frequencies. Let's turn up the amount parameter, and we see the curve start to bend in the middle as the ratio starts to reduce at the target frequency, currently 1 kHz. With the amount all the way up at 100%, our target frequency has a ratio of 1:1, so will not be compressed at all. So let's set the frequency down at about 100 Hz to target that fat baseline. And I can now use the amount parameter to control precisely how hard that bass part hits the compressor, without affecting other elements higher up the frequency spectrum. The shape of the curve can also be changed, with a sharper, more surgical bell available, and a choice of gentle or steeper shells. The amount can also be set to negative values. This doesn't increase the ratio at the target frequency, as the ratio is never higher than the setting you dial in with the ratio knob. Instead, it reduces the ratio for all other frequencies. I could therefore use a bell shape to target compression at just low-mid frequencies, perhaps to reduce boxiness. Or I could target upper-mid frequencies to control harsher elements. Or I could use the shelf settings at the other end to reduce the ratio for just the high frequencies. Or to focus the compression on just the high frequencies and reduce the ratio elsewhere. This is an incredibly powerful feature, only possible because of Kotelnikov's delta-based processing. And it can be as useful on individual channels as it is over full mixes. The effect is somewhat like dynamic EQ, though more subtle as we're still only applying different flavours of full band compression. However, considering the fact that we're only modulating the overall gain of the signal, there's a dramatic difference in sound between, for example, a broad, gentle smile curve with a higher ratio in the mid-range, and its opposite frown with compression more focused on the low and high extremes. Use the FDR button to toggle the curve on and off and compare with a flat setting. When you're happy with your ratio curve, press Edit again to close the window and show the attack and release controls again. While I'm here, I'd like to point out the innocuous-looking Yin and Yang buttons, also only available in the Gentleman's Edition. These change the compression behaviour so that more harmonics are added during gain reduction. Turn on Yin to add harmonics to low frequencies for a thicker, richer sound. Or Yang to add high harmonics for a crisper, shinier sound. Or both to add harmonics evenly across the whole spectrum. These buttons only change the compression behaviour, so Kotelnikov will still be bit transparent when no gain reduction is occurring. Okay, let's take a look at the stereo processing modes at the top, which are available in both versions of the plug. If you're actually processing a mono signal, you can switch the plug to mono mode and save a few CPU cycles, which can be useful in hosts that don't provide true mono channels. With stereo signals, you also have the option to process just the sum or difference channels, otherwise known as middle or side. And you can of course use two instances to compress mid and side channels independently if required. Back in the default stereo mode, however, we find an additional stereo sensitivity section at the bottom. This is not a stereo linking control, as Kotelnikov always modulates left and right channels by the same amount to avoid stereo image shifts. In fact, with the difference parameters set to 0%, Kotelnikov tracks the sum of the two channels. So we'll tend to ignore wide stereo signals and we'll focus on the centre instead, which can sometimes make stereo imaging seem wider. Set to 100%, the compression is keyed by whichever of the two channels is louder, which preserves the original stereo width of the material, but can result in loud signals in one channel audibly ducking the signal on the other side. The Gentleman's Edition also provides an additional left or right stereo sensitivity parameter, which will give priority to one or other of the channels. Set it to either extreme to ignore the opposite channel's dynamics entirely. This might be useful when one channel has very different levels or dynamics to the other, but with most conventional stereo material, it will be best left in the middle. As with all Kotelnikov's parameters, you can click the numeric field to type in a value directly if you prefer. Okay, let's take a look at the output section to the right, which initially may appear to have an unnecessary duplication of gain controls. Actually, with conventional compression techniques, the output gain knob does exactly the same thing as the makeup gain knob, and you can use either of them to restore the level lost from compression. The extra control becomes useful when using parallel compression techniques. The makeup and dry mix knobs can be used to control levels of the compressed and uncompressed signals respectively. Then the output gain can be used to scale the combined signal. Users of the Gentleman's Edition also gain some very useful loudness matching options. Input and output levels are compared automatically, and when the ready LED glows green, you can press the trim button to apply a gain offset and match the loudness of the input signal. Alternatively, you can do it the other way around. Set the output gain manually as you would normally. Then when the ready LED glows green, the equal loudness bypass will allow you to compare your processed signal with a loudness matched version of the dry signal. Both versions of the plug come with a selection of useful starting point presets. And if you right-click the preset menu, you can save your own settings, or copy the settings to paste into another instance of the plug. Kotelnikov's presets are stored as a simple string of human-readable text, as we can see if we choose the Share State option. So presets can also be pasted into an email or into a forum post. If you need more information, you can enable interactive help hints with the question mark button at the top. Or you can open the detailed user manual via the About box. Thanks for watching.